Christmas dinner, when my son slid a nursing home pamphlet across the table to me, I knew he thought he was making a move. He was 37 years old, successful by any measure, and he had decided I was a problem to be solved. The table was still set with the good china his mother bought before she passed. The candles were still burning, and I did what I had been doing for 37 years. I waited. I picked up the pamphlet, set it aside, and handed him an envelope instead. Inside was every document proving that the business he built, the cars, the house, the whole life he thought he earned, was built on money I gave him silently, year after year, while he never once asked where it came from. He thought he was the self-made man, but every step of his rise, the business, the house, the life, was built on money from a father who never asked for credit, never demanded thanks, and never once stopped believing in him. Until the day his son slid a nursing home pamphlet across the Christmas table. That's when the silence broke. This isn't just about money, it's about the stories families tell themselves to justify betrayal. And the question that will haunt every viewer: how many of us would have seen the truth before it was too late? Raymond built the first investment property in 1987 with money from double shifts at the plant. He bought a two-bedroom fix-upper on the south side of town for $34,000. The roof leaked. The furnace was older than he was, and the bank turned him down twice before a small credit union approved the loan. He and his wife Linda scraped every dime while their son Nathan was still in diapers. They painted walls themselves. They laid linoleum themselves. They did the plumbing themselves. By the time Nathan started kindergarten, Raymond had 2 properties. By middle school, he had 4. Linda handled the books. She kept a ledger in a spiral notebook, tracking every repair, every tenant, every dollar. The rule was simple: you never talk about what you have, you just have it. That silence became family culture. Nathan grew up knowing they were comfortable, but he never knew the specifics. He brought friends home to a modest house with an old couch and a television that needed the antenna adjusted. He wore hand-me-downs. He mowed the lawn for an allowance. On the surface, they looked like any working-class family in the county. That was the point. Linda said once, "Money talks when you let it. Better to keep it quiet and keep it working." She passed away when Nathan was 23. Cancer, slow and steady, the kind that gives you time to say everything and still leaves things unsaid. In her final weeks, she made Raymond promise 2 things. First, that Nathan would inherit everything when the time came, structured in a trust that no spouse could touch without Nathan's explicit consent. Second, that Raymond would not tell Nathan until it was absolutely necessary. She said, "Let him find his own path first. If he knows what's waiting, he might not build his own muscle." Raymond kept that promise for 11 years. Nathan went to college on a partial scholarship and loans. He studied business. He graduated with debt and a hunger to prove himself. He started a small construction company in his late 20s. He worked 18-hour days. He borrowed money from a local bank. He failed on 2 projects and nearly went under. And Raymond watched. He watched his son struggle, and he said nothing. But there was a third account. An account Linda had opened in Nathan's name when he was born. Every month for 26 years, Raymond deposited extra cash into it. Not enough to make a difference immediately. Enough that by the time Nathan turned 30, it held $240,000. Raymond never told him. The money sat in a conservative growth fund, quietly compounding. When Nathan's company hit a rough stretch in year 5 and the bank threatened to call his loans, Raymond transferred $100,000 from that account into Nathan's business operating account. He did it through an intermediary. He made sure the source was hidden, and he watched his son survive. That was year 1 of many. Over the next decade, Raymond funneled more than $400,000 into Nathan's ventures, always silently, always through shell accounts or third parties. He bought equipment for Nathan's company under fake vendor names. He paid down Nathan's supplier debts using a PO box and a trust. He made sure Nathan never failed, but also never knew who was really catching him. Nathan believed he was self-made. He built a successful general contracting firm. He bought a house in the good part of town. He wore tailored suits. He married Claire, the daughter of a commercial real estate developer from outside Atlanta. Claire had polish. Claire had ambition. Claire looked at Raymond's cracked windshield and worn jeans and saw a liability. Nathan saw a father who had never quite made it. And neither of them knew the truth. The truth was that Nathan's entire operation, his payroll, his bonding capacity, his ability to win contracts, depended on a hidden equity line Raymond had secured using the rental properties as collateral. The properties that were all paid off. The properties that Nathan thought were just a few modest houses his dad had held on to. By the time Nathan was 35, Raymond owned 8 properties, 31 rental units, no debt, and a net worth approaching $2.5 million. He drove the same 2009 pickup with a cracked windshield because it still ran fine. He bought his jeans at Walmart. He cut his own grass. And he let everyone, including his own son, believe he was just a retired factory worker living on Social Security. That was the setup. That was the silence Linda had built. And it held until the Christmas dinner when Nathan slid a glossy brochure across the table. The brochure had a picture of a smiling elderly woman on a bench in a manicured garden. The name of the facility was Serenity Ridge. The tagline said, "Care for life's next chapter." Nathan smiled when he slid it over. He said, "Dad, we've been thinking about your future." Raymond looked at the brochure. He looked at his son. He looked at Claire, who was watching him with careful, rehearsed warmth. And he reached into his jacket pocket. The envelope was plain, unmarked, slightly worn at the corners from years of sitting in a desk drawer. He set it on the table next to the brochure. He said, "Nathan, before you plan my future, you need to understand your past." Nathan laughed, uncertain. Claire shifted in her seat. Raymond said, "Open it." Nathan opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, trust documents, and a single handwritten note from Linda dated her last year. The first document was a summary of all 8 properties, their addresses, current values, and the trust structure that named Nathan as sole beneficiary. The second document was a statement from a dormant account showing every transfer made into Nathan's business over 12 years, every payment, every hidden rescue, every silent intervention. The total at the bottom was $637,000. Nathan stared at it. He said, "This isn't right." Raymond said, "It's all right. Every penny. You didn't build that company. You didn't build that house. You didn't build any of it. I did. And I did it quietly because your mother asked me to let you find your own path. But you found this path by walking on a bridge I built beneath you. And now you want to put me in a home." Nathan's face went gray. Claire said something, but nobody heard her. The candles flickered. The ham sat untouched. And Raymond waited for his son to speak. Nathan set the papers down. He picked them up again. He looked at his father, then at the numbers. $637,000, 8 properties, a trust that made him sole beneficiary. He said, "I don't understand." Raymond said, "I know you don't. That's the problem." Claire reached for the documents. Nathan pulled them back. She said, "Nathan, let me see." He said, "Not now." She said, "I think I need to understand what we're dealing with." And Raymond heard the word "we." He had been hearing it for 18 months, but now it sounded different. Nathan pushed his chair back. He stood up. He walked to the window. The street was dark except for the neighbors' Christmas lights. He said, "All those years I thought I was scraping by. I thought I barely made it. I thought I was the one who pulled it off." Raymond said, "You did pull it off. You worked hard. You managed the crews. You won the bids. You showed up at 6 in the morning and stayed until dark. I just made sure the bank didn't take it away from you when you stumbled." "How many times?" Nathan asked. 12 years. Every time you came close to losing it, I put money in, sometimes through your supplier accounts. Once I paid your payroll tax penalty directly to the IRS under a different name. You never saw it because I made sure you never saw it. Nathan turned around. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. He said, "You let me believe I was a failure who turned it around. You let me think I was lucky. You let me walk around thinking I had finally become a man." Raymond said, "I let you become a man. That was the point. If I had told you at 25 that there was a trust waiting, you would have leaned on it. You would have made different choices. You would have risked less and expected more. Your mother knew that. She said, 'Let him find his own way.' And you did. You found your way. I just kept the road paved." Claire stood up. She said, "This is a lot to process. But let's be honest, Raymond. You kept secrets too. You let us believe you were someone else. You let us worry about you. You let Nathan think he had to take care of you." Raymond looked at her. He said, "I let you decide what I was without asking me. That's different. You saw a man under a sink and assumed he was poor. You saw a cracked windshield and assumed he was struggling. You saw a Walmart shirt and assumed he needed your help. You never asked. You just planned." She said, "We were trying to help." He said, "You were trying to take my house. Don't mistake what this was. The LLC your father drafted gave you and him 60% and me 40. I would have lost control of the only thing I built. You would have managed my assets, sold my home, and put me in a facility where the brochure promised care, but the fine print said you can transfer residents when their funds run out. I had Howard review it. He found the clause on page 14. The room went quiet. Nathan looked at Claire. He said, "Page 14. She said, "It's standard." He said, "You were going to put my father in a home and take his house." She said it was a plan for his own good. He's getting older. He lives alone. He drives a truck that should have been retired years ago, we thought. You thought wrong, Nathan said. He said it loud enough that the neighbors might have heard. He said, "You thought wrong, and you never told me. You and your father sat in this house and drafted an agreement to take my father's home while I was in the other room." She said, "You knew we were planning something." "I knew we were planning to help. I didn't know you were planning to take." Raymond watched them. He had seen this moment coming for months. He had hoped it wouldn't happen, but he had prepared for it. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a second envelope. He said, "There's more." Nathan said, "More." Raymond said, "The nursing home you picked, Serenity Ridge. I called them. I asked about their admission process. They told me that your wife had called 3 times in the past 2 months. She asked about involuntary admission procedures for elderly residents who might be resistant. She asked about power of attorney requirements. She asked whether a child's signature was sufficient if the spouse was deceased and the parent was deemed to lack capacity." Claire said, "I was doing research." Raymond said, "You were building a case. You wanted to know if you could commit me without my consent, and you found out that in this state you can, because the state's filial responsibility law says adult children are liable for a parent's care. But it also says that if a parent is deemed incapable, the child can petition for guardianship. And once guardianship is granted, the child controls the assets. That was the play. Get me declared incapable. Take the house. Use the proceeds to pay Serenity Ridge. And when the money ran out, the state would pick up the tab, but the house would be gone, the trust would be drained, Nathan would inherit nothing." Nathan stared at his wife. He said, "Is that true?" She said, "It's not like that." He said, "Is it true?" She didn't answer. Raymond said, "I'm not angry. I spent 64 years learning that anger doesn't fix anything, but I need you both to understand that I knew. I knew from the day you asked about the mortgage. I knew when Gerald came over with the LLC agreement. I knew because I have been underestimated my whole life, and I learned to pay attention." He turned to Nathan. He said, "Son, you are my heir. You always have been, but you are also my son, and that means I will not let you become the kind of man who signs papers without reading them. The kind of man who lets his wife steer his family into a ditch while he watches. You are better than that. I know it because I raised you, but you need to prove it." Nathan sat down. He put his head in his hands. The Christmas ham was cold. The candles had burned low, and outside a car door slammed. A moment later, there was a knock at the front door. Raymond stood. He said, "I invited someone. I thought it might be time for all of us to talk with a neutral party." He opened the door. Howard, his attorney, stood on the porch in a wool coat. Behind him, a woman in a dark suit. She held a briefcase. She said, "Mr. Whitaker, I'm here about the petition you filed. I'm the court-appointed investigator." Nathan looked up. He said, "What petition?" Raymond said, "I filed for a protective order 3 days ago. I asked the court to review Claire's contact with Serenity Ridge and her father's involvement. I have records of every call, every email, every draft of that LLC agreement. The investigator is here to determine whether there was an attempt to commit elder financial exploitation." Claire said, "You called the court on us." Raymond said, "I called the court on what you were doing. If it was innocent, the investigation will clear you. If it wasn't, the court will decide. Either way, this stops now." Nathan looked at Claire. She looked at the floor. The investigator stepped inside. She said, "I'd like to speak with each of you separately, starting with you, Mrs. Whitaker." Claire followed her into the kitchen. The door closed. Nathan and Raymond sat in the living room. Howard took a seat by the window. The only sound was the clock on the mantel, ticking toward midnight. Nathan said, "Dad, am I a bad person?" Raymond said, "No, you're a person who trusted the wrong person. That's different. That can be fixed." But the clock kept ticking, and the kitchen door stayed closed. The kitchen door stayed closed for 47 minutes. Nathan counted every one of them. He stared at the Christmas tree, the lights still blinking, the presents still wrapped. He said to Raymond, "What happens now?" Raymond said, "We wait. That's all we can do." Howard remained by the window, silent. He had seen this before. Families come apart over a dinner table. Assets that took a lifetime to build destroyed in minutes. And a son who thought he knew his wife, realizing he had married a stranger. When the door opened, the investigator stepped out first. Claire followed. Her eyes were red. She was not crying, but she had been. The investigator said, "Mr. Whitaker, I'd like to speak with you now." Nathan stood. He looked at Claire. She looked away. He followed the investigator into the kitchen. She closed the door. She sat at the small table where Raymond had eaten breakfast for 20 years. She opened her briefcase. She said, "I pulled the phone records from Serenity Ridge before I came. Your wife called them on November 3rd, November 17th, and December 1st. She asked about capacity evaluations. She asked about emergency admission procedures. She asked about a specific clause in the admissions contract that allows the facility to petition for guardianship on a resident's behalf if there is documented resistance." Nathan said, "She told me she was just gathering information." The investigator said she was building a paper trail. She also filed a preliminary application for a guardianship hearing in the county where the home is located. That was filed on December 4th under her name and yours. "Mine," Nathan said. "She signed my name." "She did." The court received it. They issued a hearing date for January 11th. If your father had not filed his protective order, you would have been summoned to court in 3 weeks to determine whether Raymond Whitaker was capable of managing his own affairs. Nathan put his hands on the table. He said, "I didn't sign anything. I didn't know anything about this." "I believe you," the investigator said. "That's what I'll put in my report. But I need you to understand what you're facing. Your wife acted alone in filing the application, but it was under both your names. You are legally responsible for that filing until it is withdrawn. If your father's protective order is upheld, the court will determine whether there was an attempt at exploitation. That could result in penalties, including a finding of abuse that would bar you from inheriting under his trust." Nathan said, "I didn't know." The investigator said, "I believe you, but the court will have to decide. Have you talked to a lawyer?" He shook his head. The investigator said, "You should." She closed her briefcase. She said, "I'm going to recommend the court grant the protective order. I'm also going to recommend a full investigation into Gerald Turner's role in drafting the LLC agreement. Your wife's father is a commercial real estate developer. He has been involved in at least 3 similar arrangements in the past 5 years. All of them involved elderly adults. 2 of them are currently under review by the state." Nathan felt the air leave the room. 3 similar arrangements. His father-in-law had done this before. He had built a business model around older people with assets and children who didn't ask questions. He said, "Can I see those cases?" The investigator said, "They're public record. You can access them in the morning, but I'll tell you this much. In one case, the property was a farm in the next county. The elderly owner was placed in a facility 8 months after the LLC was formed. The property was sold within a year. The family didn't discover what happened until the owner died, and they found the facility had been charging $20,000 a month. By then, the equity was gone." Nathan stood. He walked to the kitchen window. The neighbor's Christmas lights had turned off. It was past midnight now. He said, "My father is not senile. He's not incapacitated. He manages more assets than I do. He built everything from nothing." The investigator said, "I know. I've seen his financial records. That's why I'm recommending the court take this seriously. Your wife and her father made a very specific assumption. They assumed a man driving a 20-year-old truck can't manage $2 million. That assumption could cost them." She stood. She said, "I'll file my report in the morning. The hearing will be expedited. I'd recommend you get your own lawyer and you separate your interests from your wife's, because if this goes the way I think it will, she will be named in a civil suit, and so will her father." Nathan walked her to the front door. Raymond and Howard stood when they entered. The investigator nodded at Raymond. She said, "You were smart to call us. Most people don't. They just let it happen." Raymond said, "I've been underestimated my whole life. I learned to pay attention." She left, the door clicked shut. Claire was still sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at Nathan. She said, "You have to understand I was trying to help you." He said, "You filed a guardianship petition under my name. You signed my signature. You were going to have my father declared incompetent so you could take his house and put him in a nursing home. And you did it with my father-in-law, who has done this at least 3 times before." She said, "I didn't know about the other cases." He said, "But you knew about the plan. You knew you were going to take his house. You knew you were going to move him. You knew your father had drafted an agreement that gave you 60%. How did you think that was going to work out for him?" She said, "He was going to be taken care of." He said he was going to be taken care of the way those other families were taken care of, the ones who lost their farms, the ones who found out too late. She didn't answer. Nathan walked over to Raymond. He said, "Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked more questions. I should have read the paperwork. I should have paid attention." Raymond said, "You're paying attention now. That's what matters." Nathan said, "What do I do?" Raymond looked at his son. He said, "You go home, you think about what you want your life to look like. You decide whether your wife is part of that life. And then you tell her, you don't ask, you tell her that's what being a man means, and then you call me in the morning." Nathan nodded. He walked to the door. He stopped. He said, "Dad, the $600,000. Raymond said, "What about it?" Nathan said, "Does it need to be repaid?" Raymond said, "It never needed to be repaid. It was a gift. It was always a gift. Your mother wanted you to have a foundation, not a handout, a foundation, and you still have it, but you need to understand what it cost." Nathan left. Claire followed. Howard stayed. He said, "Raymond, you did well tonight." Raymond said, "I did what I had to. I just wish Linda could have seen it." Howard said, "She saw it. She always saw it." Raymond walked to the kitchen and looked out the window. The street was quiet. The only light was a single bulb on the front porch. He thought about the phone calls, the LLC drafts, the guardianship petition. He thought about what would have happened if he had not called Howard 3 weeks ago. He would be in a facility by now. His house would be listed. His son would be grieving a man who was still alive. He said, "Howard, what happens at the hearing?" Howard said, "You get a ruling. The investigator's report will be strong. The other cases will be admitted. Gerald Turner will be deposed. So will Claire. And Nathan will have to decide where he stands." Raymond said, "He'll stand with me." Howard said, "I believe he will, but he'll pay a price. He'll lose his wife. He'll lose his father-in-law's business connections. He'll lose the life he thought he had." Raymond said, "He'll gain the truth. That's worth more than all of it." Howard nodded. He put on his coat. He said, "I'll see you at the courthouse." The hearing was set for January 11th, but the court expedited it after the investigators' report landed. The new date was December 28th, 3 days after Christmas. Raymond spent those days in his house, doing what he always did. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table and watched the morning light move across the floor. Nathan called every day. The first call was short. He said, "I told Claire she needs to move out until we figure this out. She's at her father's." Raymond said, "How do you feel?" Nathan said, "Like I'm standing in the wrong life." The second call was longer. Nathan said he had pulled the public records on Gerald's other cases. He had found them. 2 were still active. 1 had been settled with a confidentiality agreement. The third call on December 27th, Nathan said, "Dad, I read the depositions from the farm case. The family testified that Gerald approached them at a funeral. He offered to help the widow manage her assets. 6 months later, she was in a home and the farm was listed for sale." Raymond said, "That's who you married into." Nathan said, "I know, I'm sorry." Raymond said, "Don't be sorry, be smart. Tomorrow you tell the truth. That's all you have to do." The courthouse was an old limestone building on Main Street. Raymond arrived at 8:30 in the morning. He wore a jacket Linda had bought him 15 years ago. It still fit. Howard met him in the hallway. He said, The judge assigned to this is Judge Morrison. He's been on the bench for 20 years. He does not like elder abuse cases. He does not like people who target the elderly. This is good for us. Nathan arrived alone. He looked like he had not slept. He hugged Raymond. He said, "I'm ready." They walked into the courtroom together. Claire was already there. She sat next to Gerald, who wore a suit that cost more than Raymond's truck. They had a lawyer, a man in his 50s with a sharp face and a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He said, "Your Honor, my clients intend to contest the protective order. There was no exploitation. There was a misunderstanding." Judge Morrison looked over his glasses. He said, "Mr. Harrison, I have the investigator's report. I have phone records, LLC documents, and a guardianship application signed by your client's daughter under her husband's name without his knowledge. Let's start with that." Claire was called to the stand. She swore in. She kept her hands folded. The judge asked her about the phone calls to Serenity Ridge. She said, "I was doing research." He said, "What kind of research?" She said, "Looking into options for my father-in-law." Judge Morrison said, "Did you discuss those options with your husband?" She paused. She said, "Not in detail." He said, "Did you tell him you were filing a guardianship petition?" She said, "No." He said, "You signed his name to a legal document without his knowledge or consent. Is that correct?" She said, "I thought he would agree with me." Judge Morrison said, "That's not how the law works." He turned to Gerald. "Mr. Turner, you are under oath. Have you been involved in similar arrangements with other elderly individuals in this county?" Gerald's lawyer stood. He said, "Your Honor, my client's past business dealings are not relevant to this proceeding." Judge Morrison said, "Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Turner." Gerald said, "I have helped families structure their assets." The judge said, "I have records showing that you drafted LLC agreements for at least 3 elderly individuals in the past 5 years. In 2 of those cases, the individual was placed in a care facility within 12 months and their primary residence was sold. Is that accurate?" Gerald said, "Those were separate matters." The judge said, "Were they?" He pulled a document from the file. "Because the language in the LLC agreement you drafted for Raymond Whittaker is nearly identical to the language used in what the court calls the Baxter matter. In that matter, the elderly homeowner was declared incapacitated 8 months after signing. Her son later testified that she had no history of cognitive decline before the LLC was formed." Gerald's face was pale. He said, "I followed standard practice." The judge said, "You followed a pattern, and this court does not tolerate patterns that exploit vulnerable adults." The investigator was called next. She presented her findings, the phone records, the guardianship application, the parallel cases. She said, "In my opinion, this was a coordinated attempt to gain control of Raymond Whittaker's assets through undue influence and misrepresentation. Mr. Whittaker's financial records show he is fully capable of managing his affairs. He has done so for 37 years. There is no evidence of cognitive decline. There is no evidence of incapacity. There is only evidence that his daughter-in-law and her father assumed he was an easy target because he lived modestly." Judge Morrison took a moment. He looked at Claire. He looked at Gerald. He looked at Nathan. Then he said, "I am granting the protective order in full. I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges, including attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult and filing a false legal document." Claire started to cry. Gerald's lawyer asked to approach the bench. Judge Morrison said, "Denid." He turned to Nathan. He said, "Mr. Whittaker, you are not charged with anything, but I want to make something clear. You are the beneficiary of your father's trust. You are also his son. That means you have a responsibility, not a financial responsibility, a human responsibility. Do you understand?" Nathan said, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge said, "Good. This court is adjourned." The courtroom emptied. Claire and Gerald left through a side door with their lawyer. Nathan sat in the wooden bench, not moving. Raymond sat next to him. He said, "It's over." Nathan said, "Is it? She's going to be charged. Her father is going to be investigated. I'm going to be the guy whose wife tried to steal his father's house." Raymond said, "You're going to be the guy who told the truth. That's how people will remember it. That's how I'll remember it." They walked out into the cold January air. The sun was low. The sidewalk was salted. Nathan said, "Dad, what do I do now?" Raymond said, "You go home, you figure out what you want, and you call me when you're ready to talk about the trust. I'll show you how it works. I'll show you what your mother built. And then you decide what kind of steward you want to be." Nathan said, "I don't deserve it." Raymond said, "You don't have to deserve it. You just have to be ready for it. That's what inheritance means. It's not a reward, it's a responsibility." They stood on the courthouse steps. Nathan said, "I need to find my own lawyer for the divorce." Raymond said, "Howard knows a good one. I already asked." Nathan laughed. He said, "You think of everything." Raymond said, "Your mother taught me to. She said, if you plan for the worst, you can enjoy the best." Nathan drove him home. They sat in the driveway for a while. The house looked the same. The oak tree Linda had planted was bare for winter. Nathan said, "I used to hate this house. I thought it was small and old and embarrassing. Now I think it's the most solid thing I've ever seen." Raymond said, "It's paid off. That makes it solid." Nathan smiled. He said, "I love you, Dad." Raymond said, "I know, I love you too. Now go home and get some sleep." Nathan left. Raymond walked inside. He hung his jacket, he made coffee. He sat in his chair and looked at the kitchen where everything had happened. The table where the brochure had been placed. The chair where Claire had sat. The spot where the investigator had stood. He thought about Linda. He thought about what she would say. She would say, "You handled it." She would say, "Now teach him the rest." Raymond opened the desk drawer. He pulled out a folder he had not touched in years. It was marked, "For Nathan, when he's ready." Inside was a handwritten letter from Linda, dated the year she died. He had never read it to Nathan. He had been waiting for the right moment. The letter said, "My dear son, if you are reading this, your father has decided you are ready. That means you have earned it, not the money, the trust. I have watched you from wherever I am, and I am proud. Your father loved you enough to let you struggle. That is the hardest kind of love. Now he loves you enough to let you know the truth. Be kind to him. He carried this alone for longer than he should have. And be kind to yourself. You are not your mistakes. You are what you do next." Raymond folded the letter. He put it back in the folder. He would give it to Nathan next Sunday, over breakfast, when the light came through the kitchen window the way Linda always loved it. He turned off the downstairs lights. He went upstairs. He set the folder on the nightstand. And he slept the way he had learned to sleep, not perfectly, not without weight, but soundly. The sleep of a man who had done what needed to be done and was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks later, Nathan showed up at the house on a Sunday morning. He brought coffee from the diner on Clement Street. They sat at the kitchen table where the morning light came through the window the way Linda always loved it. Raymond handed him the folder with Linda's letter. Nathan read it in silence. When he finished, he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart. He said, "I want to understand everything. The properties, the trusts, how it all works. I want to learn it the way you learned it." Raymond said, "Good. That was your mother's hope." Over the next months, they spent Sunday mornings together. Raymond walked him through each property, each mortgage that had been paid off, each decision that had been made. He showed him the ledger Linda had kept. He taught him about cash flow and reserves and the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth. Nathan took notes. He asked questions. He began to understand not just what his father had built, but what it had cost. The district attorney's office filed charges against Claire and Gerald. The case drew local attention. People in the county who had known Raymond as the quiet man in the old pickup began to look at him differently. He didn't change. He still bought his jeans at Walmart. He still fixed his own pipes, but something had shifted. The silence Linda had built was finally breaking. Gerald's real estate license was suspended pending investigation. The 2 other families he had targeted filed civil suits. Claire moved out of state. Nathan filed for divorce. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, the way things end when they were never really built on anything solid. Nathan took over the management of the properties. He did not sell the company, he restructured it. He paid back the suppliers his father had secretly covered. He insisted on that. Raymond tried to refuse, But Nathan said, "You taught me to stand on my own. Now let me prove I can." So Raymond let him. By spring, the oak tree in the front yard had new leaves. Raymond sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the neighborhood settle into dusk. Nathan came by less often now because he was busy, but he called. He always called. And Raymond, he still drove the same truck. He still cut his own grass. He still walked to the diner on Tuesday mornings. But when people asked how he was doing, he had something new to say. He said, "I'm teaching my son what matters, and he's teaching me that it's never too late to start telling the truth." This story is not about money. It is about what happens when families stop talking, when silence becomes strategy, and when the people we love most become strangers we thought we knew. The question it leaves is not about Claire or Gerald or even Nathan. It is about the silence you might be keeping right now and what it might cost the people you love. If you found something in this story that made you think, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the hardest truth is the one we have been avoiding the longest. And sometimes the gift of being seen clearly is the only inheritance that matters.